if you're beginning a walking program and you're keeping your goals very short and sustainable, I think it's easy to just pick a pair of shoes you might have at home and go 10 minutes up and 10 minutes back and you'll be fine. The exception would be in Chicago, you got to be careful about ice and frost and cold, so you might want something that does protect you and still gives you traction. So the average person is not going to need too much of a tough decision to buy something, but after you make it to the next 3-month mark, it would be important to consider investing in something that will propel you to other sports or a deeper practice of walking, running, 5Ks, or even hiking. Now I happen to love hiking, so you'll see most of my shoes are centered around getting off trail. So this is a Salomon. Salomon has a wide variety of shoes. I like Salomon the way they fit me. I also like the lacing system. I showed you a pair of Salomon boots earlier. Well, this lacing system that you'll find in the shoes and the water crossers is very easy because you just pull, you cinch down, and you're tight. It holds pretty well. The only problem with a single locking device, is you can't really adjust the laces. So if you have hot spots to your feet with regards to breaking in the shoe, it's hard to adjust the lacing system to take the pressure off the hot spot or the rubbed area. So that's one disadvantage. Shoes in general, as long as they have decent lugs, and I like Salomon because it has two different types of rubber. One rubber will stay grippy or will stay somewhat soft even in cold. One will stay harder and give you grip and traction and poke the soil. So it's nice to have a different lug pattern. And then I just happen to like the fabric in Salomon's as well. So the same rules continue with Salomon's shoes versus hiking boots. You still have to get about a 1/4 inch clearance between the longest toenail and the front of the toe box. And you don't, as you're moving in your gait, you don't want to be lifting your heel more than a 1/4 inch out of your heel cup. So if you are, then especially with a shoe, you won't be able to cinch down the ankle. You might have to pick a better shoe that has a more narrow heel. The basic thing you have to know about shoes, whether it's walking, running, marathons, or hiking, is it all depends on your foot. There's two extremes of foot, or I should say two types of feet. There's either the flat foot, that refers to the arch on the inside of the foot, or there's a high arched foot. Now in the high arched foot you have a lot of bones that are all stiff, and the one benefit with that is if you have high arches, you don't really collapse as you come down. It's great when you toe off. When you toe off, you're ready to propel yourself forward. So high arched folks, pes cavus it's called, really good with toe offs. But the disadvantage of a pes cavus or high arched foot is that because it's so solid, when you come down with a heel strike, when you come down, it can send shock into the ankle, into the shins, into the knee, the hip, the back. So you have to have cushioning for the high arched foot. The opposite would be the flat foot. Used to have a guy in high school when we were practicing for indoor track in the wintertime. The guy you could hear him come along like halfway down the hallway. You could tell it was him because he would slap his feet down. The benefit of having a flat foot is that it's soft. It'll take a lot of hit. So a heel strike in a flat-footed person is more tolerated than in a high-arched person. The problem with flat feet, though, is after you get the heel strike, when you're trying to push off, the lever is very weak. So it can tend to cause friction burns, it can tend to cause blistering, you can have mid-foot strain. So you need, a flat-footed person will need a little bit of an arch support. Remember, the high-arched guy needs cushioning. Flat-footed person needs a little bit of an arch support. Now, if you know your basic form, whether it's a flat foot or you have a tendency for high arches, you will then be able to, especially with Runner's World magazines, they grade, well, a lot of magazines will grade the shoes out there. Then they'll say good for pes planus, good for pes cavus, or pronators versus supinators. But I think when you go to the specialty stores, the specialty running stores in Chicago, it's called Dick Pond's, and there's a couple others. I used to lecture at Dick Pond's in Lisle. Well, the one benefit is that you have runners that are salespeople. They usually will put you on a treadmill inside the store, observe your running gait, film your running gait, and then decide what your running form is, what you require. The old days, I used to just take an old pair of shoes, two old pair of shoes, watch and see where the most wear was, take a look at the angle of it's called a Q angle, the angle between the ankle, the front of the ankle, the front of the knee, and the front of the hip. You kind of assess that, assess what their complaints are, you look at their wear and tear, and you make suggestions based on what the reviews were for the types of shoes. But so there's a wide variety as long as you know what kind of foot you are, and what kind of sport you're going into, or what you need the shoe for. Then it would be helpful, because if you go to your salespeople, they'll be able to best guide you. I like REI because you can actually return your purchase without any question. So the other things to consider would be a mid-rise, or what we call something with ankle arch support. These Adidas are technically sneakers. They just happen to be high-top sneakers. And I think they made these to get you out into the wilderness. They're not really trail runners, but they look like a cross between an athletic shoe and getting off trail. So the benefit would be I can actually sprint in this. I can use this as a standard utility shoe. It's got some pretty good lug patterns. It's tough. It's a little heavy for a running shoe, but it does have the support of the ankle. You can kind of mess around with the lacing system on these in case you get a hot spot or an area that's rubbing if you're trying to break these in. But typically, as I mentioned with the hiking boots, if you have something made of fabric, you typically won't have to break it in. There usually should not be any hot spots. So this is nice for if you want to be hitting mud, or you're going to be going into areas with mud, with snow. You have protection so the snow and the mud doesn't get inside your sock. So that's probably the only benefit for these things. I got them on sale and I need a kick around shoe, so I bought them. They're pretty decent. The other things too I wanted to show you are, these are triathlon shoes. They're used because you have an elastic lace. You can slip these on real fast. They have a mesh so that if you get them wet in doing your transition, if your feet are wet, you can get them wet and they'll still dry out nicely. These are not meant for the trail. The lug pattern is very simple. If you come across twigs or brush, you might get poked and torn. They're just a running shoe. But what I wanted to show you was, if you pick running shoes for beginning a walking program, and then you want to apply the running shoe to hiking, it might not work properly. So running shoes are typically for running. One of the things I wanted to comment on is the difference between the two running shoes that I see are being sold. You have a standard running shoe, good thick heel, narrow front, pretty decent arch. Then you have the minimalist shoe. This is not too severe, but you have some people who do what's called barefoot running. They take the heel and they decrease the thickness of the heel, assuming that most people will run this way. The difference between this, where you're supposed to come down, take off, come down, take off. So heel strike, toe off, heel strike, toe off. In the minimalist shoe, if you come down and heel strike with this, with the limited amount of cushioning on the backside, you'll probably have problems with your heel sooner or later, either plantar fasciitis, heel strain, if you're a kid, Sever's disease, or problems with your shin splints or calves. So I think that if you ask me as a sports medicine doctor, minimalist shoes are great if you're in a sprinting position. If you've ever watched the marathons, I used to be at the Chicago Marathon all the time at the volunteer tent right at the halfway point, and it's hard to hear them, but when the Kenyans would come through, they would kind of just float through, always stepping on the ball of their feet. And you wouldn't hear them struggling, you wouldn't even hear their footsteps. And most of them would be running like this, like sprinters. If you look at the sprinters, usually sprinters with their spikes would have spikes in the front only, and they run on their toes. You don't usually see sprinters come down on the heel and push off. So the problem is, if you continue with that in a minimalist shoe, you're bound to have problems. There's a nice study by an orthopedic surgeon. He was analyzing how fast it took a person to accommodate or change their running style when they bought minimalist shoes. And he found that adolescents would be able to change their running style quickly. They go from standard heel striking toe off to only running on the ball of the foot. Adults, though, had a more difficult time adjusting their running stance or running style. So I would, unless you're used to running on your toes, I'd probably stay away from minimalist shoes. That's my personal decision. And plus, I had shin splints when I switched over. So those are the choices with regards to shoe wear. You have to know what you're going to be using the shoes for. Again, if you're starting on and you've successfully finished a 3-month program or beginning a 3-month program and you're now going to launch into the next summit, I would gauge and see what your summit's going to be. If you're going to be hitting or attacking a hill and you're going to be carrying a backpack and you're going to be going 7 to 14 miles, you don't want anything like this or this. You want something with support. If you're just going to be leisurely doing things in the neighborhood, running flat, maybe running on occasional grassy field, then you have a choice of what you want to wear. So again, if you kind of set your goals and know what your goals are, you know what kind of foot pattern you have, and you also are either seeing a sports medicine doc for aches and pains. I don't care if it's in the foot, the toe, the knee, or even the low back or upper back. You should always take that into consideration, because that thing called the kinetic chain is a movement that goes from the toe up to the top of the head, and it's some tennis players up to the hand, up to the top of the racket. So any part of the chain can be important or should be considered if one part is off. So that's where you want to invest in seeing not only a person that specifically knows about shoes, like a runner or a podiatrist, but also a sports medicine doctor to figure out if all this stuff is related. If you invest, if you know your problems, you know what your goals are, you invest properly and don't go broke, then again you'll have or make or attain that goal and then make it a sustainable change. You'll just be more comfortable with less possibilities for injury.